Again, thanks for joining me. My name is Luke Iseman, and my startup with my co-founder Andrew is Make Sunsets. This is probably not the first photo, but one of the first awesome photos of Earth from space. People call it pale blue dot, among other things. It's a pretty awesome place in my and many others' opinions. This guy, who I am more than a little obsessed with, put this on a cover of what Steve Jobs described as Wikipedia before the internet. And actually, can you guys see the full thing, or do you see the video windows on the side as well? Give me one sec here.
Now the windows are on the side, and the full screen is a little bit cut off. Yeah, now it's just full screen.
Better. Great. So Sky Stewart Brand put out this thing called the Whole Earth Catalog, basically Wikipedia before the internet. And he has this quote that I'm more than a bit obsessed with, that he opened the first Whole Earth Catalog with. And it's not a choice. We don't get to choose whether we are as gods. We are at the start of the Anthropocene, and we might as well get good at it. I'm sure we will have, and I'm looking forward to many interesting disagreements during the discussion period of this. But I think one thing we can all agree is that we haven't been particularly good at being gods and taking care of our pale blue dot lately. This is a day in San Francisco that I'll never forget. I'm sure many of you have experienced other climate things that you wish you hadn't. So what I'm going to do about it is I'm going to cool Earth. We're going to create as much cooling as quickly as we safely can, and hopefully I'll encourage you all to try and do the same. First of all, apologies. Andrew, my co-founder, told me we should have had better branding on our little Chinese balloon. Next time we'll make the logo bigger. It was all our fault, all the Chinese balloons. We put up a couple grams of sulfur dioxide, and we're just getting used to taking all the blame. Any weather will be our fault, of course. It already is. Our 5 grams of sulfur, they're why the monsoon was too severe and not severe enough. And yeah, it's all our fault. So apologies up front. Real quick about me, 3 of the coolest things that I have built before Make Sunsets, of course, are at the opposite end of the spectrum from venture-funded startups. I taught myself to weld and built a fleet of bike taxis in Austin, Texas. It was a very, very, very fun job, and ended up being a fleet of about 20 of them around downtown. I was lucky enough to work at Y Combinator as director of hardware, and helped make it the best place in the world for early stage hardware companies. And then I've done a variety of very tiny housing things. This is a collapsible apartment building that myself and some friends built at Burning Man a few years ago. Each of those square panels is a 4x8 sheet of wood. So it's like a beehive style collapsible apartment complex. I was lucky enough to be born the oldest of 5, lower middle class. And philosophically, I'd describe myself as a syndicational anarchist with techno-utopian tendencies. So how'd I get here? I did a little bit of climate protest. This is with Extinction Rebellion in New York City. I think 2019, we got arrested for meditating on Black Friday, this giant shopping day in the US, in the middle of 34th Street near Macy's. Highly recommend that anyone who cares about environmentalism or just wants to see really good marketing, look at the Extinction Rebellion stuff, particularly the initial talk that they do. It's really, really effective at explaining some of the problems that we're facing and the role that civil disobedience might play. It was a lot of fun. It was a very bougie getting arrested experience from what I hear compared to others, and compared to my one other experience. We're in and out before we could even finish doing our group yoga session in jail. So while it was a lot of fun, and I encourage everyone to partake in activism, unsurprisingly, we didn't solve the problem. Many of us have protested, I assume. Many of us have written and thought deeply about climate, and the world is literally still on fire, greenhouse gas emissions get worse every year, even during COVID. So I got frustrated and basically semi-retired. I was like, spearfishing is the one thing that I like to do and am naturally good at. Otherwise, pretty uncoordinated. I'll move to Mexico and buy a cheap piece of land in Baja and while away the days, spearfishing, build a small solar-powered off-grid place, and the responsible adults can maybe someday figure out how to solve the problem. That worked for a while. Then I ran into a problem, which was I read this book by one of my favorite authors. It's called Termination Shock. Highly recommend it. Apparently I missed the novel part because to me it is an interesting example of a radical set of actions that we might take, not to ask politicians someday, somewhere maybe, or beg big businesses to please fix the problem for us, but actual action that we might take to directly cool the world. Then I read another book, The Ministry for the Future. Highly recommend reading both of these. They're not well written because they're sci-fi in my opinion, but we'll grade it with a curve. I would strongly posit that our actions will determine over the next 10 years whether we face more of a ministry for the future over the rest of our lifetime or more of a termination shock. I clearly prefer the former, and I think after you read them both, you'll probably agree. I haven't really talked about this one, but the third book that I will highly recommend and has been really influential on me over the last 2 years is this text by Andreas Malm. It is not what I thought it was going to be when I ordered it. It's a philosophical treatise. There are no how-to manuals. Actually, there is a small section about how to deflate tires on SUVs, but other than that, no direct advocating for terrorism on Malm's part. But he does have this really fascinating quote. And I think if I remember right, he's quoting a British philosopher about the animal rights movement and how, as conditions for animals didn't change, PETA led to different offshoot groups, led to more and more radical action over time. And this guy observed that it is strange and striking that climate change activists have not committed any acts of terrorism. I am firmly against all acts of terrorism. The point that I take from this is that we're not getting results with what we're doing now. What we're doing now is fundamentally not working. The world gets hotter and hotter, more and more CO2 equivalent in the atmosphere year after year. So whether you end up agreeing or disagreeing with me, I think we can all agree that things aren't rosy. We're not on track for an equitable and sustainable world. So maybe, just maybe, we should consider escalation or changing of tactics. Speaking of things not changing, 2012 geoengineering experiment canceled amid patent row. That was about the SPICE project in the UK. ScopeX 2018, first sun dimming experiment will test a way to cool Earth. 2021, test flight for sunlight blocking research is canceled. We are doing the same thing, asking for permission, slowly going through existing processes that got us here, and we're expecting different results. And I think that maybe we should consider that the same old methods may continue to result in the same old results. And this is the status of that international consensus that many of the leading academics, or all of the leading academics in the field, seem to be waiting for. We can't prevent land wars in Europe right now as an international community. I wish we could. It's super sad that anything like this ever happens anywhere, let alone continues to happen in the modern world. But yeah, this is the international consensus that many are waiting for. So if step one of a climate action is that everyone in the world has to have a meeting about it and reach anything like agreement, that's dead on arrival. In case you're not depressed enough yet, let me share with you the specific detail about this chart. You've almost definitely all seen this. Different emission scenarios and where they'll get us to by 2100. And then, increasingly vague, obviously, projections of where we may end up even further in the future. There have been headlines recently that I don't understand how they got past any responsible editorial board. about how RCP 8.5 is unrealistic, the worst case scenario here. If we look at the data, we are in 2020 on track. We're exactly hitting what we would not want to be at RCP 8.5. But that's not the terrifying detail. The terrifying detail is a footnote on this. Biotic feedbacks are not included. Even in the RCP 8.5 scenario, the IPCC and the scientists who worked on that report are pretending that Earth's albedo is not shifting from melting sea ice. They're pretending that there are no increases in methane emissions from melting permafrost. They're pretending that forest diebacks are not reducing carbon sequestration. So when I heard that detail, that's what really pushed me to, okay, yeah, there's, you know, some amount of risks and certainly not going to be an easy path to try to scale up, but we're past the point where we should be putting sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight. So I did it. With zero instrumentation, or at least I think I did it to be accurate technically. This is a weather balloon underinflated, so it actually might have gone to above the stratosphere technically, with some sulfur lit on fire and the resultant fumes put into the balloon, a couple grams. Honestly, it might have even been under a gram into the balloon, and then added helium until it was underinflated but very buoyant. Launched 2 of these back in April from next to my solar-powered trailer home in Baja. It felt really good for whatever that's worth, to take a direct action, no matter how small the impact, that, you know, could actually make a difference for our climate. I gave myself till the end of 2022 to either, you know, because this is firmly like mad scientist territory kind of thing where you can spend all your time and all your money pursuing this. So I gave myself till the end of 2022 up to $50,000 of my own money to experiment with this and either raise money by then to try to build a business out of it, or just publish whatever I got, even if it was just like, here's, you know, how to make sulfur dioxide and put it in a balloon. Not particularly deep science, obviously, but yeah, much to be blunt, much to my surprise, I found 2 firms that were willing to believe in my dream and basically say, fuck it, we'll fund you trying to turn this into a business. And even crazier, I made a list of the best salespeople that I knew, and at the top of that list was Andrew, my now co-founder, and I was able to convince him to say, fuck it, I think I might be able to sell something like cooling credits around this. So we're off to the races. Company was incorporated October of last year of 2022. So, you know, we've been around well under 6 months. You or anyone else who wants to can go and pay $10 to buy a cooling credit. If you click on the details or further down on this page, you'll see that represents a commitment that is refundable at any time prior to launch by us to put a gram of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere for you. We try really hard. This company is in no way affiliated with Y Combinator, but they have a saying that I really love, which is make something people want. And the best breakdown of it I heard is one of the partners there, one of the smarter and stranger people I've ever met, was telling the couple hundred entrepreneurs at the start of a batch, you know, it's really simple. You just make something people want. And that breaks down into 2 parts. You have to actually make something. This can't just be renders or just talking about how someday maybe, you know, if only we can get international consensus, then maybe we'll start construction on a new model of airplane and it'll only cost $20 billion and take 20 years. Instead of doing that, you have to actually have some physical or digital thing that, you know, you can try and show that people want. And this can be a variety of things from, you know, some of my friends doing really ambitious hardware projects like planes and rockets, would get LOIs initially very vague and then more detailed over time, basically to provide some evidence to you as a founder and to potential other customers and other investors. You have to show some evidence that people actually want this. So that's what we're trying to do. we failed abysmally at what we were trying to do initially, which was to convince companies who represent almost all of the spend in the voluntary carbon market to instead, or in supplement to their existing spend towards net zero, to also buy some of our cooling credits. And because it's the voluntary market, it's, to be blunt, it's a total shit show, like a giant scandal at Vera, which accredits like 60% of all voluntary carbon credits, just came out. According to The Guardian, 90% of those credits are fake, meaning they represent no incremental carbon being sequestered. So we failed at selling to companies in a kind of snake oil industry that is very challenged on the supply side, at least for things under $100. I think that the carbon dioxide removal stuff is very real, obviously, and very valuable, and people should support it. But most of the forestry credits appear to just be fake. So we failed at selling to companies, but what you're seeing here is, one, a lot of attention, a lot of people visiting our website, and two, a surprising amount of sales. This is actually about $1,000 higher now. Someone bought, one individual bought $1,000 worth of cooling credits from us earlier this week. So, these are very, very tiny numbers, obviously, especially compared to the, $750,000 that we've raised. But our bet now, and what Andrew's focused on for the next several months, is seeing if we can build a direct-to-consumer business here, where actual individuals are so frustrated with the pace of change overall that they'll trust us, as 40-some people already have, to try and do something about it by launching some sulfur dioxide for them. Things we are not religious about are many. We're not religious about using balloons. We're not religious about using sulfur dioxide. We are not religious about how much MRV we need to do. That should be defined by our customers. And then, we want to help the state of the science, but frankly, got a little tiny startup budget, and it might be years before this really catches on to where companies are placing meaningful orders. So I'm not going to fly an optical spectrometer for fun. I would like to for fun, but I'm not going to. I can't justify that to my investors and to my customers. So we don't have religion around pretty much anything except for one thing. We are going to cool Earth. We're going to create as much cooling as we safely and quickly can. And just to clear up what has been most of the disagreement, I think, in my summary of what I'm doing versus what might happen, I 100% agree with most of the experts in the field who feel that an international coalition representing everyone should get together and decide how to do this. That would be better than what I am doing by far. International coalition, responsible global communication, coming up with this as some, UN or something. That would be far better. I will shut down my company if that starts happening and is having a meaningful impact on the climate. Far worse than that is to have a private company doing this. However, far worse than having a private company doing this is to do nothing at all. And the honest truth is, we've basically been doing nothing at all. Every day that we don't put substantial amounts of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere equates to preventable deaths and extinctions. So we've had, as some of you might have seen, some challenges from operating in Mexico. The Mexican government put out basically a press release saying, because make sunsets, we're going to ban solar geoengineering. This isn't about fighting with Mexico or any other government. The Mexican government, and frankly, we have better things to do. So next up is launching from the US. We'll be going to a popular launch site. Welcome home, as they say in those parts. One of the real things that I hope to challenge everyone on this call to consider, there are a million things that we can and should do better, as in Andrew and me, as in two goofball non-scientists with some funding. And we certainly want your feedback, but even more than that, I want to encourage you to consider whether it means starting a company or protesting or whatever for you is an escalation of tactics other than, terrorism or other things that we shouldn't do. I want you to consider doing more And I don't think that that should be more analysis. I think we need more of a bias towards action in climate. I think that's a big part of the problem. Because people are watching.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Greta, to be clear, is not a fan of geoengineering. I would say give her a couple of years and she'll come around. But that very same quote, it strikes me, is very likely to be something that people 10 or 20 years from now say about us and our reluctance to start doing up to at least 0.5 degree Celsius or 1°C geoengineering at scale. So look, at the end of the day, this is where we're headed. There's 2 ways we can get there. This can either be our triumphant and careful expansion to being an interplanetary civilization because we've grown up and decided that, of course, we need to manage our mix of reflectivity and gases in our atmosphere and anywhere else we go. Or we can continue apace and turn our current Earth into a largely dead husk like this is. Because as Brand updated his quote to say, we're as gods and we have to get good at it. The necessity comes from climate change. So let's do it. There's enough talk, enough analysis. It's time to cool Earth. Thanks for your time. And I am going to go out on a limb and say that you might have some questions and some disagreements with me. I'm excited to hear them.
Okay. Thank you, Luke. If people could raise their hands or indicate that they want to ask questions, we can start with the questions. And I see that Robert, do you want to kick off the questions?
Hi, Luke. Look, I think that was a really good presentation, and I've been following the debate, especially in the geoengineering Google group, and it's been very interesting to see the vehemence of how geoengineering scientists and activists have critiqued your work. Now, I'm actually pretty sympathetic to the way you've described it today in terms of an incremental approach. Just start doing something, and that will generate debate and engagement. I'm also really keen on your concept of cooling credits. Now, my assessment is that carbon credits, as you've described, are largely fraudulent. And if we can find ways to measure the impact on radiative forcing of any action, then that demonstrates its climate impact, cooling impact. So well done, and I think that incremental approach that you've described is something that we just need a lot more discussion about, because like there's a great paper in Medium just last week, which I'll put a link to in the chat, which explains the psychological failure of the climate change movement to engage with the problem, and I think that this sort of approach that you're taking is a really helpful way to open up that public conversation. So thanks.
Robert, did you have a question in there?
Well, it's as much a comment, but I think if like Luke has explained his incremental approach, but I think that I'd just welcome if he would like to say more about the concept of cooling credits and whether he's explored it in terms of radiative forcing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for the compliments. And in terms of cooling credits, there's debate about the exact amount of radiative forcing And I think it's healthy debate. I would love to see us be doing large scale emissions measurable from satellite to more clearly measure how much radiative forcing we have with different emission events. However, I don't want to use this lack of precision about the exact amount of radiative forcing as an excuse for inaction. And one of the other interesting IPCC footnotes is on a chart where they forecast climate change and translate. They're distancing themselves from this, and I hate to see it, but like the SSPs, the shared socioeconomic pathways, rather than the RCPs, the SSPs, it's very difficult to find from the UN a chart translating that directly to temperature change. They instead say parts per million of CO2. And in one of their footnotes, they explain that our expert consensus is that 1,000 gigatons of CO2 added to the atmosphere will create between 0.2 and 0.6 C of warming. So the radiative forcing from CO2 emissions has a 3x mainstream margin of error, yet it would be insane to use that as an excuse not to worry about our CO2 emissions. I apply the same logic to adding sulfur dioxide to the stratosphere.
Okay.
Oh, I think you're on mute, Ron.
It's a thank you, Luke. Daniel.
Hi, yeah. Thanks for the presentation, Luke. It was really interesting, and it's such a bold thing you're doing. I'm actually amazed that you've been able to get away with it in terms of obviously the situation in the US. Obviously, they've just shot down the Chinese one. I know it's quite funny your joke about that, but it's quite, in all seriousness, to launch any sort of object into the stratosphere through, obviously airspace used by planes, all those sort of things. Isn't there a legal issue, and also, just the chance of it being shot down or something like that? How do you get over that issue?
I'll leave out the shot down. I hope it doesn't come to that. And that's frankly over my pay grade or understanding. Yeah, I hope that if other countries get upset about what we're doing, they'll actually contact us, unlike what Mexico did, or worst case, issue a press release like Mexico did about changing laws. On the legality side, we are what is called an unmanned free-floating balloon. In the UK, which I've started digging on, it's CAA regulations. In the US, it's the FAA. Up to there's design criteria which exempt you from needing a permit to launch, and we are falling well below those. Assuming that your payload is physically large enough, it actually drops if you have a smaller payload because it's denser and would fall faster, or be more dangerous as it falls. It's a little lower, but if you have a large enough payload and follow some really basic design criteria, you can launch up to 2 6-pound payloads per balloon without needing any permit in the US. If you follow more criteria, you can actually do substantially larger. And that's far beyond what we're doing. We're doing grams at a time. Right. With our payload, we may get as high as 1 kilogram, but that's like, GoPro and GPS tracker and other stuff included.
Okay, so you carefully research that stuff. Obviously, that's really good. Yeah. So, and another thing, I suppose at the scale we're using these balloons, which are brilliantly below the threshold where they become a legal issue. Obviously, you're using a certain amount of helium per balloon. I mean, I heard there's a helium shortage.
Daniel,
yeah.
Daniel, sorry, I just, if you could hold and come back again with your second question, unless it's a follow-up. Thank you. Tracy.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Luke. Thank you for doing this. I imagine at this point that you're not only developing thick skin, you're building up a good set of calluses as well. I guess I'm following up in a way with legal as well. Thanks for sharing with us the news that you're considering launching in the United States, and the information about the FAA thresholds for permitting requirements. I just wanted to ask 2 questions, or 2 halves of the same question. Could you have a sense of how quickly you plan to launch in the United States? And the second half is, have you considered approaching say, for example, the FAA or NOAA or EPA, and essentially in enlisting their assistance or their consent, even if you may think you don't need it, just as a way to perhaps provide some pathway for the government to actually start issuing some sense of guidance as to how to proceed with this. One thing in particular is you might want to take a look at the National Weather Modification Act, which does require prior notification to NOAA for any type of attempt to modify weather, which is defined broadly enough to include climate change. And just, it seems to me that, rather than sort of trying to provoke action, it might be a way to also perhaps force people to actually do something to make the path easier for others as well.
Yeah, it's definitely the shift to launching in the US has been in the last couple of weeks. And as far as I've gotten with my research has been, what at our small scale, and I've kind of made an assumption that at least some of the researchers in the field have as well, which is that at when I'm far below emissions of a 747, for example, I think that from my limited understanding and a little reading of Tosca and other things, I think there's something called a de minimis standard that I fall well below. But yeah, I'll definitely look into Weather Modification Act and anything else we might run afoul of. For all the negative things about it, the US is quite permissive for farmers because they tend to basically each have a representative. They're so overrepresented that things like weather modification or emission of chemicals from planes even, for better and worse, are quite easy to do in the US.
Thank you.
Then Ron, just a quick follow-up. Luke, I appreciate that. My suggestion is, even if you don't have to, there might be some value to approaching the agencies and perhaps enlisting their thought on this, because otherwise you may be finding some folks who are going to be arguing with you about some of the legal standards, and it might be a way to circumvent, but we can talk about that some other time. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on that.
Thank you. I'm just going to, because it's related to Tracy's question, would Make Sunsets consider having a scientific and technical advisory board for people who, and you don't need to answer this right now, but I think it might be something that would be both helpful to you and helpful for the project as well. So.
Yeah, I would love to have an advisory board. Please reach out if you might be interested.
Okay, thank you. John.
Yes, all this legal stuff makes me wish that we could mount a legal battle against the powers that be, that they're not looking after the planet and their strategy of emissions reduction only is not working. It's not going to keep the planet under 1.5 C, and it's not going to prevent the tipping points from tipping so far that they become irreversible. Therefore, the powers that be are behaving irresponsibly for the planet, and we ought to hit back. I've done my little bit on this sentiment, but trying to get the science straight. So I wrote a paper for the AGU, which I'd love you to have a look at, and I've written some policy implications as a result of my scientific argument. So would you like to see that?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm the opposite of
put that in the chat, John, if you're interested.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to reach out directly,
I think Doug's got the link. Doug, have you got the link to my paper?
Do you have a question to Luke, John?
Yes. is he aware that the IPCC has been hijacked by the fossil fuel industry?
Well, I mean, I was at the one in Cairo, and apparently a lot of fossil fuel representatives were there, and I think it's I forget which country. It's in the Middle East, and I think the chair of it is also an executive at an oil company. So, you know, not exactly a conspiracy theory to see that there's an increasing role for the oil companies there.
Yeah, so basically the oil companies want to see this strategy continued because it's business as usual, and their forecasts for the emissions reduction is from 37, the current is 37 gigatons of CO2 per year. Their forecast by the International Energy Authority is a reduction to 32 from 37 by 2050. It's their forecast is negligible. They are absolutely confident that nothing effective will happen. So of course the strategy is succeeding.
They're not historically, to be clear, we're emitting more every year, and scale up of carbon dioxide removal is quite slow, and I'm not an expert scientifically enough to know if it can even do the job within the next 50 years.
So, you know, it's absolutely disgraceful what's happening, and we do need Extinction Rebellion or some kind of rebellion against what's happening. And I hope your little action will help to provoke things, but we do need to have a rebellion on a huge scale. And we need the climate activists who are well-meaning to realize that they've been hoodwinked by IPCC into thinking that emissions reduction is the answer to climate change, when it patently is absurd from the scientific point of view and every other point of view.
Thank you, John. Andrew.
Excuse the relative darkness in which I'm currently shrouded. I didn't mean to do that. I meant to do that, which is slightly less dark. Luke, you're probably aware that I sent an open letter to your firm via the Google group, to which I've not had a public response or a private response. In it, I think I listed 13 points where I think that what you're doing goes against what even the most lax standards that anyone might set for your organization and processes might be. I'm interested to know whether you plan to respond to this open letter and whether or not you issue a formal response if any of the 13 points, with the exception of the advisory board, which you've alluded to a moment ago, and which, for the avoidance of doubt, I'll be happy to serve, as I've previously intimated to you, whether you are planning to address any of those 13 points that I believe remain outstanding as of today's date in terms of your company's approaches and policies. I've just received in the chat a notification. It's called an open letter to make sunsets, and it's on the geoengineering Google group, which is publicly listed. So if you'd like to read the letter and 13 points within it, Gideon and I are planning to publish a more general letter, which is about distilling those 13 points down into a general code of conduct, which can be shared to situations beyond make sunsets, but substantially encompassing the same points about safety, efficacy and verification, regulatory approval, and proper announcement of launches. So it'd be great to hear from you on your views either on the specifics of the letter or on the general points within.
Andrew, can you put that in the chat? Would you care to put the letter in the chat?
I'll try. I'll look for the link and put it in the chat. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember all 13 points offhand. Someone just said in the chat forgiveness or permission. And yeah, I think that's a fair and useful summary. I fall on a very specific side of that divide that I expect many will disagree with, and that's fine. And I think when I see somebody doing something stupid, I try hard to minimize how much I complain about them doing the stupid thing and do something that is not as stupid myself instead. And again, we're not experts. There's a million different approaches that should be occurring here. It's a sad state of affairs for the world that we're the only people, as far as I can tell, to publicly acknowledge putting sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. We need all approaches, and rather than, I'd encourage everyone, tell me what you think, but rather than arguing with me, take your own approaches.
Well, Luke, I mean, just to be specific, are you going to carry on launching toxic gases in unannounced balloon launches with no code grid coordinates and with no confirmed or publicly available labeling that would enable the members of the public to identify any hot landings that have occurred as a result of your releases and safely handle, return and isolate the balloons? Because I mean, I just think this isn't a matter of opinion. This is just a matter of gross, inexcusable recklessness. Are you going to fulfill these basic standards or not?
I'm going to fulfill my legal and personal safety standards. They will be different than yours and different than other people's, but yeah, I don't agree with I don't want to go down a rabbit hole about this, but I don't agree with your description of the danger of the balloons. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Luke. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Sorry it didn't work out the other day when we tried to set up a call. Good presentation. It's always good to get the feel for the person, and you just really brought the why you're doing this and your passion and what angle you're coming from. It's all getting got a lot clearer for me. I'm not a expert on the solar radiation. I'm part of the group because I'm doing something else on cooling to do with ocean cooling. But in that sense, we're all aligned that we all realize there's something wrong. We need to do something beyond net zero. We need to cool down. So that's definitely where we're all on the same page here. And that's also where I wanted to hook into. If there's something more we can do here together. You mentioned the cooling credits, and that's something I've independently of you, I'd been thinking about the same stuff for my own technology, because you're working with VCs. I used to be a VC. I know how they think, and if you want to start a company, you need to have a revenue model. You need to show somehow how you're going to make money and how you can make them money. And I was just wondering what your plans were. You've got a salesperson. Are you going to, well, just not 2 points. I talked to Stripe recently, mentioned cooling, and it's not on their radar at the moment. It didn't seem that they had any discussions so far. Then I talked to the environmental practice, sustainable practice at McKinsey, had a conversation with those guys, and there was also very little at the moment, even though they've got now quite a big sustainability practice. That topic is not really on their radar at all. So it's just really underserved. Question is, have you talked to Vera, Gold Stands? Have you talked to any of those agencies? I think you mentioned that you don't want to get involved into that whole system. Is your plan then to do it privately through your webpage, or because I think my hypothesis on this one would be yes. It's initially you would get a few early adopters, put a bit of money into it, but if to scale it up, I think you might need a bit more credibility and a little bit more oomph behind it, or independent verification or validation. But that's exactly the same thing I'm fighting with. How am I going to do this? I've been sitting into a number of carbon credit sessions now, how people do it and which organizations they're using, or if they're doing it by themselves. And I'm still trying to get grips of how can I how can I turn this into a revenue generating model that funds the technology and the science that I need to do. So it would be great to hear your thoughts on that one and going forward.
Yeah, I've had 2 or 3 companies tell me that if I get blessed by one of the 3 or 4 main accreditors carbon equivalents established for this, which that they would buy credits if I can do that. So I've researched this a decent amount. Verra won't talk to us. They're too prestigious in spite of 90% plus of their credits being fake. Gold Standard, we are making a little progress with. The other thing with this is like, yeah, $750,000 is a lot of money. Like that's several years of buying equipment and space and, you know, keeping Andrew and I working on this. But like to go through even one of those certification projects, Puro is an exception. Puro I'm super excited about and seems to be doing this better. It looks like if, and this is a giant if, we can get through the gold standard process, it'll be something like 2 to 3 years and well over $100,000 plus, you know, fees for some, like that's direct fees from them. And then the funniest part is for them, and I believe the same is true, but I'm not 100% sure with Verra, they charge per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent that they bless. And that would actually be, if we go through the gold standard process, that would be our biggest cost per ton. The bribe, I mean fee that we pay to the prestigious blessor of the carbon credits. So I'm trying to control a bit for my philosophical opposition to paying into that. But also, yeah, I mean, you're right that they're the standard kind of, although, yeah, I'm excited about the newer ones. A friend started a company called Pachama that is doing really cool verification stuff specifically for forestry. Yeah, that's a huge space. And like, maybe that's a company for somebody on this call to help start, like, especially for last thing on this rant, when you think about MRV with things like releasing of particles with relatively well-known.
Luke, could you just define MRV for folks who are not?
Yeah, so this is like the big thing that you're supposed to pay Verra or Gold Standard or others for: monitoring, reporting, and verification. And when you think about that with like, did this tree get planted here and is it still growing? That's like an actual, especially for the small amount of carbon sequestered per tree, that's a material challenge. Like you need interesting remote sensing, or some people are doing it from satellite or LiDAR from planes. If they're doing it at all, it turns out that the incentive is just to lie about it. But when you think about monitoring, reporting, and verification for something like release of particles with relatively known characteristics at a specific altitude, like I can live stream, you know, these particles going into this balloon getting released at this altitude, and then at scale to have actual verification via, like you can see sulfur dioxide plumes from volcanoes on satellite. We'd need quite a large emission to do that, but it's interesting to think about baking MRV directly into albedo enhancement and ocean temperature and other technologies where it's like a pretty easily measurable outcome, and you can bake that into the actual thing to maybe obviate the need for these third parties.
Thank you. If I could just a little follow up on that, and we've had this discussion. You are you're doing cooling, not carbon dioxide removal. You've done some calculations that I think work pretty well, although they're over 2 years instead of what we've had. So per year it's about, as I recall. Anyway, I don't want to go into the numbers, but the question is, I think whether my question would be, would it be more beneficial, because the cooling is short term, it doesn't last forever, but it's really, really important, critically important right now, as we all believe, I think, on this call. So it's a different intervention from carbon dioxide removal, and therefore I think it would be appropriate to the extent possible to make that clear and say this is the credits are for cooling. I think I saw on your website that you actually have defined it that way, which I think is a good step. And then if you're going to do that, and as part of that, I'm sorry, I'm getting on perhaps consider other types of cooling, as part of your sort of portfolio. And just as a final point, I've had some I don't think one of our scientific advisors for HPAC has mentioned this, that helium is really expensive. It's not a scalable way to do this. So if this is actually going to have a more serious effect, you might he was suggesting trying to get up at a high altitude, a mountain or something, trying to use hot air or something. But this is where, some scientific advisory help might be, I think, useful. But, so cooling right now would be a sort of a, in some ways, a kind of a protest cooling, to do this at scale would require different methods. But yeah, that's so then just the question on the cooling credit, I think, well, maybe you've already answered that on your website.
Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. And after we spoke, I made some changes to the language, and definitely, like, everyone, please, to the degree that you want to, if there's something that I'm saying that's inaccurate, we'll correct it. And yeah, we changed the language in response to Ron's feedback about differentiating between this and carbon credits. Yeah, I mean, to be clear, everyone on the call probably knows this, but just to really stress it, we have to decarbonize. This isn't optional. It's not like we can do this and just continue emitting carbon forever. The only question to me is whether we will actually do solar radiation management to save millions of lives and hundreds of thousands of species from going extinct in the meantime between now and deep decarbonization. And, that's what's so exciting about this to me. And I think that, yeah, there's a lot of challenges. There's controversy to it. There's political difficulties, most of which I was not anticipating. But yeah, that's to me what we're working towards and the opportunity. But it does not, all this does is buy us time. This does not decarbonize.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Hi, everyone. Luke, I thought your presentation was marvelous. Thank you so much. And I'm speaking as a non-technical interested person, and I think where you're going can speak to the Gretas of this world, as well as people like my children and nieces who are all saying, what are you oldies doing? And they're very despairing. So that was really marvelous. Thank you. My question is, what could our group offer in a focused way in terms of both scientific support, and you're already doing a lot of work about getting accreditation and MRV, etc. But in order to scale things up or write up the why, the what, and what are the effects, like if you had a bit of extra money and you put up a spectrometer, would that help? But basically taking it beyond the level, like I've looked at your website, but taking it beyond the level of putting up some balloons and having some cooling happening, making it into something that then it really becomes part of a trial or a first step towards governments being able to do this. What help, like not today, you can't ask today and we can't answer either, but I think everyone, I know that our energy in this group, and we would like to help with that if possible.
I think that I really appreciate the question, and thank you for the compliments. The biggest, so I think you've done good groundwork by helping raise urgency around the idea of direct cooling. I think continuing to do that and stressing, and like I'm becoming more emboldened in how I talk about carbon credits and like whether they're useful at all versus direct cooling. Advice in general, letting us know when we do something super stupid, which we have and will continue to do. And the biggest, like if somebody had a magic wand, the two biggest things that would really unlock things for us, in my opinion, are getting a government that will serve as a launch site, like where a prime minister or some local group of activists, basically we want willing and enthusiastic launch partners. And that will help, like if we know we have an island nation in this hemisphere and then another in the other hemisphere that is excited to launch with us. Initially, that's, it can literally just be, we fly there. I know carbon emissions, but I'm going to ignore those a bit. We fly there and launch some balloons with them. And then ideally, eventually it can become, if we are so lucky as to scale this up, this can become an actual economic driver for impoverished island nations whose existence is threatened by climate change. So one, launch partners, and two, businesses that would actually, even if it's just a small amount, to legitimize this. Like businesses are super conservative at the end of the day. They don't want to be the first one to buy something. So to the degree that we can get some first movers there, that'll help a lot. So advice, launch partners, and business customers are the three biggest things.
Well, I'm being a tiny bit naughty because I know I'm not supposed to speak again. But for example, in Australia, Robert and I both a part of the Uniting Church, Robert Tulip, and we have a lot of Tongan members, for example, and like Tonga is those Southeast Asian states there, they're well known for doing their own thing, but I can't say that what you've got today is enough to go and give a presentation. Like, it's possible, and that this is the space that Doug and myself and a few others are in, but I'm saying that we need a little bit more substance to saying why what you're doing is good and what effect it will have, apart from changing minds. But anyway, I'll think about what you've said. Thank you.
Yeah, and to the degree that there's like things that you would suggest we add to help move that forward, definitely please let us know. Within the next month, you should expect more than a vague picture of me launching a balloon in terms of documentation. A lot more.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna, Daniel, I just want to let people who haven't spoken yet first. So, Stephen.
Sure.
Thank you. Oops. Yeah, thank you, Luke. I really enjoyed your presentation. I think that the approach you're taking, sort of just doing it, has tremendous merit. And it's really kind of inspirational. My question is, have you heard of MEER, M-E-E-R, Mirrors for Earth's Energy Rebalancing? Have you heard of that?
I haven't, no.
Okay, I suggest you go to the website. It's MEER.org. And what MEER is advocating is reflective mirrors to reflect radiation back to space. And the reason that I bring this up is that the mirrors are quite small, and the cost for a single mirror, I'm not sure what it is exactly. I believe the founder of MEER is working on different materials that might lower the price. But the point is that they would be very cheap. And they might, you might think about adding mirrors to your portfolio for cooling credits. Okay, so that people could not only launch, a balloon with sulfur dioxide, they could also invest in a mirror or two or three and earn a cooling credit that way, or a bunch of cooling credits that way. The mirror, and the nice thing about mirrors, of course, is that the governance is not a problem, the way it is. I mean, Mexico is not going to, ban mirrors. At least I don't think so.
Well,
so the governance is a whole lot easier than a stratospheric aerosol injection. So anyway, you might think about that, and because you could perhaps build a portfolio with different kinds of cooling credits.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And there's other particles as well that we're looking at other than sulfur dioxide. I'm trying to I want to be hacking on hardware all day, and I'm trying to keep myself from doing that, because we have to fundamentally figure out if this one thing works. And then, yeah, I'm super excited about all kinds of stuff in terms of a portfolio of technologies. And hopefully one effect of this is that some people are like, yeah, those idiots with their sulfur dioxide, that's crazy, but mirrors make sense, and we're going to build a business around that. And
exactly. Yeah. Or you might do it, or encourage somebody else to do it. But anyway, thank you for what you're doing. I very much appreciate it.
Thanks.
On that note, we have a document, as I think Luke, with 19 different methods, and all of those could be potential. Some high leverage, some low leverage, some local, some there's a whole range of different possibilities, and I just wanted to throw that out there, because mirrors is one of those, for sure. And some of them may have economic benefits as well, if they were. But anyway, Suzanne.
Hi, and thank you for the presentation. I have two things to say. One, I would not be shy about challenging the current carbon credit process, even in the most rigorous settings of cap and trade. There's a lot to be desired in the legitimacy of some of the longer term methodologies that are earning carbon credits. So bravo for pointing out some of the deficiencies about how those are working, and what the end result of being able to pay to pollute, which is what the activists here in California call cap and trade. And my second question to you is regarding your not only your branding, but your operations. And can you speak in a little bit more detail about the things, anything that you wish you had done differently or would do differently? You've mentioned some about your new business plan, but what in particular do you think was alarming to people about how you went about launching your balloon and publicizing it?
It's a good question. What would we do differently? I mean, look, it's probably pretty clear, but just to make it unambiguous, part of this was like, can we do this in a way that actually gets attention? Because like, we're two dudes with a Shopify website, and my co-founder Andrew's on now. I had him running around tracking down some helium earlier. It was surprisingly difficult to find and not cheap. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things we could do differently. By my personality, I'm not the launch quietly or ask permission kind of guy. You know, that could have been better. Yeah, I think that in particular, I didn't realize how much. I think the biggest thing that I was surprised by is the accusations of exploiting Mexico by launching there, when that's like where I live half or more of the time. And particles are more effective by most modeling, not all, but most modeling shows particles are more effective launched in or near the tropics. So yeah, the accusations of exploiting Mexico, I wish I could have gotten ahead of that and maybe done initial launches in the US.
Thank you.
And also, to be fair, I don't think we've broken any laws. There hasn't been any three-letter agencies that knock on our doors yet. So
yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So we try to do everything above the law, so or not above, or by the book there.
Above the first layer of the atmosphere.
So that was Andrew Song, the other co-founder. And Andrew, did you want to say more, or you're good? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Suds.
Well, thank you, Luke, for forcing the conversation. You're certainly not crazy. When I first read about this, I thought you might be, but I guess I have two questions. One is that Mexico has now passed this ban. Were you to launch in an island nation, would they let you back in into Mexico so you could do your spearfishing? But more importantly, let's say you do launch from an island nation. What has your research shown about international response to that island nation? Condemnation if they decided to go rogue and do this. So
part of why I'm able to do this is I get to, or I choose to, or I'm too stupid to realize most of the longer term things to worry about. Like, I hate politics. I don't particularly believe in the idea of nation states as a good thing for the world personally. So I get to step back and say, wow, I'm so lucky that I might have the problem of doing something so interesting that I think is good for the world to move a conversation forward, that like a country might enter into weird, I don't understand them, geopolitical negotiations about it. So I have no idea what would happen. Long answer short, I hope that I am so lucky as to find out.
Thank you.
Daniel? Sorry to keep you waiting so long.
Sure. Yeah, this is actually addressing one of criticisms from Andrew Lockley, because I just read through his Google document. It's actually a question really well, I think you can probably clarify. I might need clarification from Andrew as well. but basically about the concern about hot landings. Now, I thought that meant that there's some sort of, ignition, and it's a bit like a hot air balloon, but there's actually a flame within the balloon. But is it just basically you gather from some sort of smoke from a fire on the ground, and the actual balloon is sealed up without any combustion within the balloon? It's just literally sealing up the smoke that you caught before you launch it. How does it work? And is that?
Can I clarify the nomenclature before Luke comes back on that point? So
Yeah.
hot landing in that definition is an aircraft that is supposed to vent at high altitude, regardless of what aircraft that is. It could be a balloon, it could be any other aircraft, but an aircraft that's supposed to vent out at high altitude and then lands with its payload intact in an uncontrolled fashion. So that could be a plane that crashes, it could be a balloon that just drifts down because it's got a small leak. Any situation where the aircraft ends up on the ground other than where it's supposed to be in a condition it's supposed to be in, that's a hot landing.
I see. Okay, well, I mean, I'd have thought that the main concern with a balloon would be that it become like a plastic pollution issue, or some sort of might be swallowed by a dolphin or something if that happened. But yeah, actually, what happened? Yeah, so sorry, I'll leave Luke to address that point.
Yeah, I mean, these are things that I think are very well considered in existing regulations, like concern about heavy stuff falling out of the sky is part of why there are limits on the weight we can launch with balloons. And then there are different limits if we launch more weight. This idea that our current setup is literally just two gases in a balloon, and you don't worry about balloons not popping, you worry about balloons popping. That is the big challenge with balloons. The bigger, more sophisticated ones are literally polyethylene, sometimes blended with something like Project Loon's giant balloons. I interviewed a bunch of people who worked there when I started learning about balloons, and they're like, problem is landing and launching. When they're in the air, it's relatively straightforward. They kept things up for 300 days, but it's literally sandwich bag plastic thickness. So the idea that we're going to magically have balloons that come down intact, yeah, it's not how balloons work. Unfortunately, that's going to be much more challenging when we try to reuse balloons.
Luke, I know a thing or two about balloons, and I'm afraid that is just simply wrong. Balloons can have micro leaks. They can have micro leaks at the tie. They can have micro leaks at the neck. They can potentially have micro leaks through the fabric that don't cause failure, although that's less common. And you can't compare what you're doing to Project Loon because they're using an entirely different material with entirely different failure properties. It's perfectly possible that you can have a balloon which launches and then comes down for a variety of different reasons, including weather conditions. If you launch on a hot day and it's got some thermal lift and it's got if it's got underloaded with lift gas, it can cool in flight and then sink as a result of that. There are many, many reasons why you could have a hot landing, and you can't just assume that you don't need to have fail-safes on these balloons. You cannot just negate safety systems by saying, oh, accidents don't happen, because it's just not correct.
Yeah, I'm going to respectfully defer to legal regulations as my minimum standard for what my balloons need to run. And, if others want to launch balloons with different standards, they should feel free to do the same. But, we have better things to do than debate details of whether balloon rules are how they should be, in my opinion.
Legal regulations don't apply to the launch of toxic gases because that's not an anticipated use case for balloons. The legal regulations have been designed to keep balloons out of the airspace of commercial aircraft.
Andrew, I think you made your point. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there anyone else want a question? Because we're getting near the end here. I don't see anybody. I would if I may just add to that conversation. I don't, and some of you are more of legal experts than I am. Can comment if you'd like, but we're, in the U.S. anyway, people are not charged with with thoughts. If somebody has the thought that they're launching the balloon because they want to promote cooling, that is not a crime. The law would regulate the actual action that you do, and in this case, you know, I think, in my view anyway, it's pretty clear that launching a, you know, what amounts to basically a weather balloon with a little bit of sulfur in it is not a, and I mean, I haven't looked at the regulations myself, but if Make Sunsets has determined that it falls under the de minimis, you know, is within the regulatory, you know, is allowed by U.S. law, then that's, you know, I don't think it's it is not an illegal action. However, it is, you know, it is certainly a provocative act of civil disobedience if, you know, or I mean, it's not even disobedience in this case. It's just it becomes a political act because of the intent of what the persons who launched the balloon are saying they're you know, they would like to happen. Anyway, I think that's all clear. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Luke and Andrew. You know, this has been, I think, really helpful, and you know, I and others, please follow up, you know, on the scientific advisory board, on the, you know, possible portfolio of other cooling methods and any other suggestions, you know, directly to Luke and Andrew, of course. And you know, thank you all for participating in this. I think it's been a helpful and fruitful discussion.
Yeah, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate you being open-minded about this.
Yes, thank you, Luke.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
Oh, and the steering circle people, please stay on.